Welcome to the Kwibuka podcast, written by Dr. Jean Damascene Bizimana, minister at Minubumwe, and recorded by Josue Ishema. After years of research, he has collected and compiled information on different actions that led to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. In this segment, we will focus on the contribution of the government-controlled media in the preparation and execution of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. The Rwandan Information Office, or RINFOR, a government press institution, played a leading role in disseminating the ideology of genocide. This office primarily manipulated the broadcast media with Radio Rwanda and print media such as newspapers, Imvaho or La Relève. It's worth noting that until 1993, there was no other radio station in the country apart from Radio Rwanda. The mobilization leading to the genocide propagated by RINFOR began in 1990 at the start of the Liberation War. In December 1990, Kangura newspaper published an article by Justin Hategekimana originating from Gisenyi, criticizing the functioning of Radio Rwanda and targeting its director, Christophe Fizi, and other journalists. Shortly after this publication, Fizi was dismissed and replaced by Ferdinand Nahimana. Another article in Kangura then praised this decision, stating, "This time, Radio Rwanda will become the voice of the people. The Inkotanyi and their accomplices should hang themselves." After the staged attack by the RPF on the night of October 4th and 5th in 1990, we witnessed the beginning of mass arrests of Tutsi. Intellectuals and merchants were targeted first, subjected to inhumane detention conditions. Many of them died in prisons and hiding places. A significant number were crowded into the Nyamirambo station, weakened by the cold and overwhelmed by hunger. Several RINFOR agents were arrested and detained. Some were tortured, including Assumpta Karangwa, who was considered King Kigeli's future queen. In March 1991, after the Ensele agreements between the RPF and the Rwanda government, all prisoners held for war-related reasons were supposed to be released, and the prisoner exchange was to take place between the RPF and the government. RINFOR agents were released, but Ferdinand Nahimana opposed their reinstatement despite these agreements and the provisions of Article 30 of the Labor Code, which stipulated that any employee detained and released without being convicted by the competent courts and tribunals should be reinstated to their position. RINFOR did not reinstate its agents. They were only reinstated a year later through 3 international reports from the European Bar Association, led by Belgian Bar President Eric Gillet. The 11 agents in question are Paul Kamananga, Prudence Kandama, Assumpta Karangwa, Violette Murorunkwere, Claudette Mutanguha, Thérèse Nyirantagorama, Jean Nturo, Calixte Ruhigira, Vincent Rwikangira, André Sebanani, and Angelique Umutoni. Between 1990 and 1994, the government newspaper Imvaho published articles calling for the persecution of Tutsi. At the beginning of the Liberation War, Imvaho launched a campaign of insults against Rwandan refugees, proclaiming them as enemies of Rwanda. This affront was also used against Tutsi within the country, including some Hutu fighting for the respect of democratic values. Some examples in Imvaho issue number 866 from October 29th to November 4th, 1990. Joseph Ndabamenye, then an editorialist and editor-in-chief of the newspaper, wrote in an article titled "No Negotiations with Rebels." The article stated, "We cannot negotiate with people who shoot their interlocutors. The enemies of Rwanda must cease hostilities and return to where they came from. Otherwise, the Rwandan army will courageously confront them to force them back, as it has proven since the beginning of the clashes with these enemies of Rwanda." Journalists published similar articles in Imvaho issue number 865 from October 22nd to 28th, 1990. For example, In Helene Nyirabikali's article titled "Minibus Played a Role in Spreading Enemies of Rwanda Inside the Country," one could read, "During these moments when our country is facing the enemies of Rwanda who attacked it, it was decided that to drive a vehicle, one must have the authorization of the prefect of the city of Kigali. The Inkotanyi used minibus and spread their elements in every corner of the country. Allowing minibus to circulate without authorization would facilitate the operations of the enemy." Kantano Habimana's article titled "We Will Defeat the Inkotanyi," oozed with hatred and villainy, stated, "The Inyenzi like those insects that shred clothes. The lions, as some units of the Inyenzi call themselves, or the Inkotanyi of Rwigema, are all the enemies of Rwanda. The enemies of Rwanda of Rwigema can disturb our tranquility, make us lose people, property, and time. However, saying that they will make us lose our heads until they defeat us definitively, I think that is underestimating ourselves too much." Finally, Kantano concludes, "What reassures us is that we will defeat the enemies of Rwanda no matter where they come from, thanks to the unstoppable shield that is President Habyarimana. Unity, we hold onto it, the enemy cannot do anything about it." In her article, published in Imvaho, issue number 866 from October 29th to November 4th, 1990, Veneranda Hategekimana falsely claimed that the Inkotanyi were recruiting children. She aimed to persuade the population that the Inkotanyi did not respect the International Convention on the Rights of the Child. However, the RPF had signed an agreement with the Red Cross to adhere to international conventions regarding the conduct of war. Here are the words written by Veneranda Hategekimana in this journal. "There is information revealing that the enemies of Rwanda are planning to recruit teenagers recruited from within the country as a strategy to wage war in the same way that Museveni did during the war to seize power in Uganda. Thus, the Inkotanyi have not hesitated to enlist children to attack Rwanda." Veneranda Hategekimana reiterated this idea in Imvaho issue number 868. Her article is titled, "The Inyenzi Ruthlessly Recruit Children." The article states, "In the war that the Inyenzi have imposed on Rwanda, they make us attacked by teenagers. These children are human shields that they do not hesitate to deploy in battles. When hostilities intensify, the commanders flee, leaving these kids to their fate. The children move like bees, plunging into gunfire without any concern. These are the strategies of the Inyenzi who claim to preach democracy, deceiving the international community to assist them, while their hearts are full of cruelty, even recruiting and abandoning children to the wild." In Imvaho, issue number 867 from November 5th to 11th, 1990, the journalist Habimana Kantano published another article titled, "We have just defeated the Inyenzi." He sarcastically commented on the RPF, revisiting the term "enemies of Rwanda." The article stated, "October 1st, 1990 at 10 a.m. and October 30th, 1990 at 5:15 p.m. These two dates are unforgettable in the history of Rwanda. On the first date, the enemies of Rwanda who called themselves Inkotanyi invaded our country. They openly entered the border between Rwanda and Uganda at Kagitumba and seized Umutara. On the 30th, after only a month of hostilities, the Rwandan army courageously repelled these barbarians who had invaded our country. Courage, Rwandan army! We have defeated the enemies of Rwanda. Now, they regret their invasion." Journalist Stephanie Nyirasafari, in her editorial in Imvaho, issue number 876, from January 7th to 13th, 1991, titled, "The Accomplices Are Still Among Us," wrote the following. "The year 1991, the President of the Republic baptized it the year of repair and construction of the damage caused by the war. This objective is commendable because the enemy has left many victims. First, we must deploy a lot of energy to search for the enemies of Rwanda hiding among us because not all accomplices have been arrested. These are the ones with provocative attitudes. This can be a cause of civil war. Second, those who have been arrested and found guilty of being part of the RPF deserve exemplary punishment. We must not make the same mistake as placing Valens Kajeguhakwa under house arrest when the prosecution had sought heavy sentences against him. The height of the era because he escaped in broad daylight in plain view of the authorities. Sakumi, a prominent merchant, was arrested among the RPF accomplices. He was also released on the pretext that he had been detained by mistake. Now he escapes Rwanda while suspicions still hover over him. Such incidents outrage the people. Lasting peace will return when these people are no longer in the country. In Imvaho, issue number 881 from February 11th to 17th, 1991, an article titled "Bacillary Dysentery Will Exterminate the Inhotanyi in the Forest of Volcanoes" was published by journalist Gaspard Senzoga. It also indicated that the Inhotanyi were enemies of Rwanda, stating, "The enemies of Rwanda attacking Ruhengeri from Uganda and passing through the forest of volcanoes are threatened in their health. In addition to the firepower of the Rwandan army, all kinds of diseases do not spare them. Among them is bacillary dysentery, which afflicts them with hunger and excessive fatigue. Scabies eats away at them to the point that some will lose their upper limbs. The cold does not spare them either. Every Inhotanyi realizes these calamities, forcing them to acknowledge their defeat." Journalist Augustin Twagirayezu expressed the same sentiment in Imvaho issue number 877 from January 14th to 20th, 1991. In his article titled "Kiombe, the enemies of Rwanda have devastated the population," he writes, "The inhabitants of the Kiombe commune could not enjoy the precious sorghum beer of Byumba as was their custom on Christmas Day. The cause of this misfortune is that they were refugees following the incursion in mid-December of the enemies of Rwanda from Uganda. Those who were vigorous fled. Moreover, the enemies of Rwanda were repelled and the border is entirely controlled by the Rwandan armed forces. Although these enemies of Rwanda continue their military training in Rwene, Kizinga, Karujanga, Bigasa, and elsewhere in Uganda, when they return, they will be beheaded." Florent Kamhayana, regional correspondent for Orinfort in Byumba, who later transferred to Gisenyi, was the most hateful journalist against the Tutsi. A native of Kivirira in Gisenyi, this journalist published several abhorrent articles and conducted inflammatory reports against Tutsi individuals. His article, titled "Byumba, the population meticulously carried out the extermination of cockroaches," published in Imvaho issue number 870 in November 1990, is highly virulent. He stated, "Recently, women captured an Inyenzi who had deserted during the humiliating defeat of his unit in Nyagatare. He arrived with a rifle, exhausted and thirsty, at the small center of Nyagatare, near a well where women were fetching water. He asked them for water to drink. Since the women understood that he was an enemy of Rwanda as he wore the Ugandan military uniform and carried a rifle, they told him, 'Why drink water? We can offer you milk.' He replied, 'You will do me good.' They offered to hide his rifle as otherwise he could be noticed by the Rwandan army. He agreed without hesitation, but after a few steps, he was knocked unconscious with pestles and stone throws." In the same issue, Papias Rubera, a history student at the National University of Rwanda in Ruhengeri, published an article with the following title, "During the reign of Yuhi IV Gahindiro, there was an RPF unit that committed horrors like Rwigema." Rubera expresses the same hatred against the Tutsi and argues that President Habyarimana is irreplaceable to govern the country. The article states, "In these moments, when the country is threatened by the attack of the country's enemies who call themselves Inhotanyi, Rwandans everywhere must unite to defeat these enemies of Rwandan's unity and peace. Rwandans, let us all rise and irreversibly cement the unity and peace guaranteed to us by President Juvenal Habyarimana. Did you know that during the reign of Yuhi IV Gahindiro, There was a military unit called Inkotanyi that committed horrors like Rwigema. These Inkotanyi from Gahindiro's time are the same as those of Rwigema, since they are all killers and live by deceit. Be brave on the battlefield. Rwandan Armed Forces, unity is strength. Another propaganda element used by the government newspaper Imvaho to spread and promote the ideology of hatred was to publish articles labeling Tutsi refugees and the RPF as enemies of peace. This derogatory term was reproduced in several Imvaho articles. In issue number 868 from November 12th to 18th, 1990, there is an article from the MRND party titled "The Contribution of MRND in the Fight Against the Enemies of Peace," which advocates discrimination. It explains that the country belongs only to a part of the Rwandans and stigmatizes the Inkotanyi by equating them with Ugandan enemies who must return to where they came from. The article states, "All Rwandans know that Rwanda was invaded by enemies on October 1st, 1990. These enemies of Rwanda, who call themselves Inkotanyi, came from Uganda with the aim of exterminating us and confiscating the gains of the 1959 revolution and the Cultural Revolution of 1993 launched by the Second Republic, by attacking with the aim of massacring the majority people. These enemies were mistaken about the bravery of the Rwandan army and the insight of the Rwandans. This insight is the fruit of MRND for the 15 years since its creation. The war that Rwandans are waging against the enemy from Uganda is not over because the enemy is still on our soil. That is why we must chase him away definitively and push him back to where he came from. MRND authorities at the grassroots and prefecture levels must deploy more energy to block the road to this enemy and fight him wherever he hides. They must continue to lead and mobilize the population to permanently block the passage to the enemy and prevent him from disturbing the peace and unity for which we have fought." In Imvaho, issue number 867 from November 5th to 11th, 1990, journalist Stephanie Nyirasafari published the editorial titled "Congratulations to the Rwandan Army." She revisits an important point in the genocide propaganda by asserting that the Inkotanyi are not Rwandans, rather they are enemies of Rwanda, and therefore their defeat should be celebrated. The article states, "On October 30th, when we were finishing the printing of Imvaho, Rwandans were rejoicing because our army had defeated the enemy and reconquered all of Mutara and even Kagitumba, where the Inyenzi had entered. Our army deserves gratitude because our soldiers preserved national sovereignty. They showed bravery in facing enemies armed to the teeth who had prepared the attack for a long time, winning the victory even when among our military and in the population there were accomplices who knew the state of our army and its strategies requires extraordinary courage. We thank the Ministry of Defense for making the wise decision to suspend the circulation of minibus and motorcycles. It allowed the population to stay at home and track down the enemy hiding among us. Hearing the crackle of gunfire, we could have scattered and the enemy could have taken all of our homes without any concerns. Although there is calm, we must not rest on our laurels. Let's remain vigilant and ensure that there's no more enemy." In this issue of Imvaho, Kantano Habimana also published an article titled "We have defeated the Inyenzi," in which he adopted a rather acerbic language. He states, "Rwandan army, let us be courageous. We have repelled the enemies of Rwanda and they regretted their invasion. When a country is populated by its citizens, invading it with heavy weapons and retrogressive ideas to occupy it is suicidal. The enemies have received a lesson. Be wise, live in harmony, in peace, especially when you are brothers. This is the wish of President Habyarimana. When will the warmongers understand?" In Imvaho, issue number 912 from September 16th to 22nd, 1991, Jean-Baptiste Nuwahumatse, in his article titled "Badolit, Negotiations Instead of Hostilities," talks about the negotiations held between the government delegation and the RPF delegation. He considers Rwandan refugees as enemies of peace and claims that they are against negotiations. He even goes so far as to write, There is us and the Inkotanyi. This kind of statement, which does not recognize that the Inkotanyi are Rwandans and goes as far as calling them invaders, foreshadows the genocide. The article states, hostilities must cease in Rwanda so that negotiations between the government delegation and the representatives of our invaders begin on the 14th of this month, and that the group of neutral military observers be recomposed. This is one of the decisions made by the heads of state of our region during the meeting held in Gbadolit, Zaire, on September 7th, which examined the problems of the war imposed on us by the Inyenzi Inkotanyi. The Inyenzi Inkotanyi also sent a delegation that circled outside the conference room without being able to participate, but they were able to dine with the heads of state who were in Gbadolit. I don't know if we can say that they were invited to the table of heads of state, unless eating in the same room means sharing a meal. The meeting decided on a ceasefire. Another decision made in this meeting, which may provide a glimmer of hope for the war imposed on us by the Inyenzi to end quickly, is that the heads of state did not approve the report of the General Hashim Bita, commander of the group of neutral military observers overseeing the implementation of the ceasefire. They decided to recompose this group and withdraw Ugandan and Burundian soldiers to leave only Zairean soldiers who will collaborate with other members coming from Nigeria. Finally, they decided that on the 14th of this month, negotiations should begin between the government delegation and the representative of the Inyenzi Inkotanyi. You know that this kind of negotiation has been continuously supported by the Rwandan government, while on the front, many Inyenzi Inkotanyi are losing their lives, while others continue to wander in Uganda on the hills near the border. Especially since October of last year, they have never been able to occupy any portion of Rwandan territory. During this meeting, Rwanda's voice was heard, its proposals were appreciated in such a way that the lies of the Inyenzi Inkotanyi will turn against them. The Inyenzi Inkotanyi continue to turn a deaf ear while the heads of states continue negotiations in Gbadolit. They have launched attacks everywhere on the Rwandan border and are suffering losses inflicted on them by the Rwandan army. In this issue of Imvaho, Jean-Baptiste Nowahumadze published another article titled, "The Inyenzi Inkotanyi Suffered a Humiliating Defeat." The article stated, while the heads of state were meeting in the conference room, Kanyarengwe and his friends, who represented the Inyenzi Inkotanyi, were wandering outside with other members of the delegation accompanying the heads of state. Kanyarengwe, who was supposedly the head of the RPF delegation, seemed out of place, quarantined by the assembly of present delegations. All the representatives of the RPF often had their heads bowed. We were indignant to note that these individuals, who claimed to advocate for the interest of Rwandans, preferred to remain silent and utter insults like poorly educated people instead of seizing the opportunity to make their program known. Thus, in Imvaho issue number 865 from October 22nd to 28th, 1990, Habimana Kantano notes the following. The refugees claimed there are 2 million. This number is deliberately exaggerated to provoke terror. It is impossible to know how it was evaluated. Perhaps they took into account the Falashas from Ethiopia, the Hima from Uganda, and the Maasai from Kenya. However numerous they may be, even if their fathers and grandfathers told them that they originate from Rwanda, even if their fathers and grandfathers told them that they originate from Rwanda, possibly occupying it is madness. This is why the youth of Rwanda, girls and boys alike, want to train to go to the battlefield. This is not a joke. Journalist Florent Kamhayana, in another article titled "Let's Identify Our Invaders," echoed the same ideas, stating, currently, Rwanda is facing an attack by the so-called refugees, grouped in an RPF front with the goal of restoring the feudal regime in Rwanda. Many Rwandans recognize the characteristics of this regime. Most of the refugees left in 1959 during popular uprisings. Others went into exile in the years following these troubles because they realized that their hated regime had no place in Rwanda anymore. In Imvaho, issue number 865, journalist Gaspar Gahigi published an article titled "Refugees Have Chosen War." He believed that Rwanda is not in a position to accommodate Tutsi refugees. He stated, "Since the emergence of the refugee problem in Rwanda, authorities have sought to resolve it peacefully. The refugees, however, have chosen to shed blood in the country. The war has complicated this problem. Many of them want to return in large numbers where Rwanda is not able to accommodate them. Currently, Rwanda can only feed 5 million people while there are 7.5 million inhabitants. At a time when the government is wondering how to feed this surplus and where they can live, do you think it's worth adding others who will have nowhere to cultivate? Everything Rwanda has done is seeking a solution to the problem. The refugees have taken a null. They have chosen to slander Rwanda and its power by constantly attacking it since independence. After more than 20 years, they have resumed hostilities. Fortunately, the good Lord who defeated them before is still with us in Rwanda." A similar line of reasoning was taken up by journalist Veneranda Hategekimana in Imvaho, issue number 867, from November 5th to 11th, 1990. Her article openly disapproves of the political program of the RPF, as indicated by its title, "The so-called political program of the Inyenzi who attacked us." The article states, "The Inyenzi who attacked us by calling themselves Inkotanyi have devised all the tricks to occupy Rwanda and claim that our country has achieved nothing since independence. These wrongdoers envisioned nothing beautiful except shedding blood to take power, and appropriate achievements for which they did not toil. Their so-called political program includes 8 points that are not consistent. The 5th point is the repatriation of all refugees. They want all refugees to return to Rwanda. They say they will not claim the properties they abandoned while fleeing, but will settle on unoccupied lands. They do not precisely identify which lands these are. Perhaps they think of the national park, but they do not want to express it openly to avoid problems with the international community responsible for preserving parks." In Imvaho, issue number 890, published in April 1991, Gaspard Gahigi wrote an article that turned the Hutu of Bugesera against their Tutsi compatriots. He titled it, "The Inyenzi Attacking Rwanda Are from Bugesera." This article disseminates hatred within the population of this region by urging Hutus to monitor their Tutsi neighbors and identify Tutsi families sending their children to support the Inkotanyi. He adds that these families will be reported to the competent authorities to be judged. Gaspard Gahigi pretends to ignore that the young people joining the Inkotanyi did not reveal it to their parents. Moreover, these young men had reached the age of majority. Therefore, there was no justification for a journalist to demand that parents be punished or killed for the actions committed by their adult children. This persecution of the Tutsi in Bugesera was also fueled by Kantano Habimana in his article titled, "Kanzenze is the supply route to the enemy. No one can tolerate it." Written in Imvaho, issue number 922, November 1991. Kantano argues that Tutsi of Bugesera, especially those in the commune of Kanzenze, are not citizens like others. They are traitors and accomplices of the RPF, and Hutu must watch them more closely because their children joined the RPF through Burundi. He concludes by stating that if the Tutsi do not pay the price, it will be the total defeat of the Hutu. Another anti-Tutsi article appeared in Imvaho, issue number 910 in September 1991. Written by Jean-Baptiste Hakizimana, regional correspondent of Renfort in Ruhengeri, titled, "I Fight Against Matimba and Nyakayaga in Nyamirambo." Hakizimana did not deny that massacres were committed by the Rwandan armed forces, but according to him, their cause should be attributed to the Tutsi who were recruited by the Rwandan army under false identities. Hakizimana states, "After the outbreak of the war, the youth showed the will to defend Rwanda. This is commendable, but as in common practice, a selection was made. However, it was noted that the tares got mixed in the good grain, hence the problem." As was common practice at the time, the recruitment of young people during the start of the 1990 war consisted of solely Hutu ensuring that no Tutsi were in the Rwandan army. Hakizimana also speaks of the tares concerning Tutsi who would have escaped the vigilance of the selectors and would have mingled with the good grain, namely the Hutu. He meant that Tutsi could have entered the army and committed murders. His message affirms that Tutsi military who would have joined the army by deceiving the recruiters would be the authors of the crimes committed by the Rwandan armed forces. This is, of course, a shameless lie. In general, in many articles published between October 1990 and the genocide of 1994, Imvaho continually ordered the population to track down RPF accomplices hiding among them. This newspaper also often claimed that the numerous arrests of Tutsi were related to their cooperation with the Inyenzi. Imvaho frequently encouraged malicious acts against Tutsi civilians, especially in the Byumba prefecture, where the Inkotanyi inflicted heavy losses on the Rwandan army. Whenever the ex-FAR lost the battle, Tutsi were arrested, tortured, or killed in prisons and intelligence service dungeons. Florent Kamayana, who was the regional correspondent for Orenfort in Byumba, played a significant role in these maneuvers. For example, in his article published in Imvaho, issue number 870 in November 1990, under the title Byumba, the population carried out a sweep against the Inyenzi, Kamayana glorifies the persecution of Tutsi in all regions of Byumba by describing it as a sweep operation against the Inyenzi. The article stated, "The Battle of Byumba, whether at Mutara or Kaniga and in the Gatuna region, was not only fought by our military, the civilian population also played its part. All roads were blocked or heavily monitored. No one could pass without presenting a pass. No one was exempt. Even vehicles with state registration were subject to the measure. Even the mayor's vehicle was stopped and searched to check what it was transporting. The entire population was mobilized. In the Murambi commune, even women were mobilized to track down those without papers. During these checks, many Inyenzi were arrested. One surviving Inyenzi from the battle was arrested in Garama commune in the Chigasha sector. He had spent the night in the bushes. At daybreak, he wanted to inquire about the roads to Nyagatare. The population quickly showed him that he had taken the wrong path. Another Inyenzi was killed by the population in that sector. He had spent the night in a cassava field searching for tubers to eat raw because he was very hungry. The population in the Ngarama commune does not fear these enemies of Rwanda. In Mimuri, where fierce battles erupted, the population arrested one who was wounded and finished him off after disarming him. In Gakirage, residents killed 3 Inyenzi while they were carrying rifles. 9 others were arrested by the population. In the Murambi commune, the population also participated in the battle. An Inyenzi was killed in the Gakoma sector, another in the Ndatemwa sector. 3 other Inyenzi were arrested in this commune. In the Chumba and Kivuye communes, residents also tracked down the Inyenzi. They arrested several and killed some. You remember what happened in Kianda, where residents disarmed an enemy and killed him with pickaxe blows and stone throws. His comrades scattered into nature. In the Muvumba commune, Inyenzi were arrested every day. One was killed by the residents while asking for food. Another, a lieutenant and doctor, was arrested the day before yesterday, the 15th. They shot him on the spot. What is the situation in Muhura? In this commune, there was much talk of Inyenzi collaborators working in the communal office. The residents also did not spare the Inyenzi by being vigilant. One Inyenzi escaped them, abandoning 160 cartridges. The residents recovered a mag rifle and its tripods along with over 500 cartridges. Currently, the population is combing the region where the Inyenzi and their accomplices have hidden weapons. The forest and the bushes have been cleared. In the Nyagatare, the population cut down trees over an area of more than 14 hectares. They discovered hidden rifles, mines buried by the Inyenzi, and cartridges abandoned when they were caught during hostilities. When the Inyenzi realized that their strategies had been discovered, as they believed that what facilitated their victory elsewhere would also work in Rwanda, they lost their minds. some turned into bandits. They arrived in Rukomo, in the Muvumba commune, and stole crates of beer from a merchant. Unfortunately, they shot him. In Nyagatare, they looted all the stores. In the Muvumba commune, they took 5,000 Rwandan francs from an elderly person and stole 40,000 francs from a merchant. But they did not take this sum because, as they were about to eat a goat and drink beers they had ordered, they were surprised by soldiers and fled without consuming their loot. They don't just steal money. If they find a pot full of food, they take it, or if they find sorghum or banana beer, they do the same. They kill everyone in their path. In the Ruaya sector, Kyumba commune, they massacred 9 residents. In Kivuye, 3 residents, but they also lost one of their own, and their plan was thwarted. In Murambi, these enemies of Rwanda killed 25 residents. All those people killed by the population or imprisoned under the pretext that they were Inyenzi were actually innocent Tutsi civilians with no connection to the military operations. Kampayana enthusiastically embraces the arbitrariness suffered by these innocent residents when the authorities had a duty to protect them. Instead of faithfully performing his profession, he embraced the politics of hatred and propagated it through Imvaho, a government press organ. Referring to the numerous Tutsi civilians persecuted in the Murambi commune, Kampayana uses a stylistic device aimed at making Rwandans believe that the barbaric acts committed by the Mayor Gatete of that commune were intended to get rid of the enemy. However, these acts were committed against Tutsis who had no connection to the war. Imagine the readers of Imvaho, distant from Jumba, like those in Cyangugu, Gikongoro, Kibuye, Butare, or elsewhere who came across such an article. Their initial reaction was a feeling of suspicion against their Tutsi neighbors, whom they might consider accomplices of the Inyenzi. This is how the genocide spread throughout the country using the media, especially those of the government, which were forerunners before other newspapers emerged. In Imvaho, issue number 908 from August 1991, Kampayana talks about the RPF attack in Rukomo that routed the ex-FAR. He relates that Byumba had been infiltrated by RPF accomplices, meaning the Tutsis, and that residents must track them down and kill them. He stated, "We will not win the war soon if we do not quickly flush out the RPF accomplices to condemn them. No one can deny that these accomplices are RPF scouts. Although these Inyenzi have caused a lot of damage, they have also suffered consequences, all the while being aware that they are committing suicide. The military discovered over 52 bodies, even heavy weapons were abandoned on the battlefield. None of our soldiers were injured. Apart from their lack of reasoning, they should realize that they are incapable of fighting and cease disturbing the peace of the population." Imvaho journalists also acted as spokespersons for the MRND, even though their profession imposed total neutrality, especially at a time when the country was supposedly becoming a multi-party system. In Imvaho, issue number 867, for example, Veneranda Hategekimana wrote, "These enemies whose goal is to shed the blood of the nation's sons, do they have anything good? What national unity surpasses what the MRND teaches us, which does not practice discrimination based on ethnicity, religion, gender, or region? Do the Inyenzi believe that our population is ignorant, unaware of our country's politics, so that after 30 years of exile, they master national politics more than our population to teach it to them? We have seen what they have learned. It is only barbarism, instead of bringing intelligence and wealth to the nation. These enemies of Rwanda brought poison to kill." In Imvaho, issue number 905 from July 1991, Helena Nyirabikari also praised the MRND. At that time, the Interahamwe, in collaboration with the military, had just massacred Tutsis in Ruhengeri and Mutara. Nyirabikari preferred to extol the virtues of the MRND as if killing Tutsis was a praiseworthy deed. Thomas Simbankabo, Orenfort correspondent in Kibungo, also propagated the MRND in an article titled The MRND meeting in Sake ended in chaos, published in Imvaho issue number 919 in November 1991. Simbangabo expressed support for the mayor of this commune, Sylvain Mutabaruka, an MRND member, known for his acts of persecution against Tutsis and Hutus in opposition. This article glorifies the criminal acts of the MRND and the acts of violence committed by Mayor Mutabaruka. Simbangabo also played a decisive role in the arrest of Tutsis in 1990 in collaboration with the intelligence service head in Kibungo, Paul Senhasha. Other articles by Simbangabo published in Imvaho incite Hutu students to hate their Tutsi classmates in schools in Zaza and Rwamagana, claiming that these schools were led by brothers, mostly Tutsi. According to him, the brothers persecuted students from Gisenyi and Ruhengeri, especially those who were displaced by the war. In summary, Simbangabo was a malicious journalist. It is possible that he was sent to Kibungo, a densely populated Tutsi prefecture, to encourage Interahamwe units by indicating their targets through his articles. We have given quite a broad overview of the role of the Imvaho Journal, but it is also important to note that Radio Rwanda, as the only national radio, played a similar role in spreading hate propaganda. This deviation occurred after the dismissal of Christophe Fizi on December 10, 1990, and his replacement by the extremist Ferdinand Nahimana. In 1992, it was Radio Rwanda that incited the pogroms against the Tutsi in Bugesera. Members of the Akazu fabricated a document falsely attributed to a non-existent group called the Human Rights Defense Group, supposedly based in Nairobi. On March 3, 1992, Ferdinand Nahimana, then director of Orinfor, handed this document to Radio Rwanda journalist Jean-Baptiste Bamwanga, who had been his student at the University of Ruhengeri. Nahimana asked him to broadcast it during the Kinyarwanda language news bulletin. Bamwanga commented on the document on the airwaves of Radio Rwanda, explaining that it had been published by the RPF leadership and mentioned the names of high authorities in the Habyarimana regime that the RPF planned to eliminate, in collaboration with its accomplices inside the country. Bamwanga publicly stated that this document had been found in Nyamata at the home of a Tutsi merchant named François Gahima, who was the president of the PL in Bugesera. This false information was broadcast throughout the day on Radio Rwanda by Bamwanga and his fellow journalist Jean-Baptiste Nuwahumatse. The radio broadcast event was the trigger for the massacres committed on the following day, March 4, 1992, which claimed the lives of approximately 2,000 Tutsi. They were perpetrated by the mayor of Kanzenze, Fidel Rwambuka, an active MRND militant who hated Gahima, as well as by military personnel from the Gako and Kigali camps and numerous Interahamwe. In 1994, the same radio station would have a major role in the execution of the genocide. Its inflammatory broadcasts were authorized by the director of Orinfor, Jean-Marie Vianney Higiro, who currently resides in the United States, where he has founded an opposition party, Rud Urunana, which collaborates with the FDLR. 2 days after the crash of President Habyarimana's plane, Radio Rwanda urged Hutu politicians not aligned with the power faction not to trust the RPF, claiming it would eliminate them if it took power. Other Radio Rwanda journalists who targeted Tutsi in the interviews they conducted or the information they disseminated include Jean-Baptiste Bamwanga, Frodois Ntaurikura, Alphonse Munyazogeye, Hyacinthe Bicamumpaka, Jules Maurice Kagina, Joel Hakizimana, Dominique Makeri, Jean-Baptiste Hakizimana, Agenesta Mukarutamu, Alexis Nshimiyimana, Jean-François Nsengiyumva, Jean-Baptiste Nuwahumatse, Evariste Murasandonyi, Gérard Gatare, and others. Check out the rest of our podcast and share them with others